Bradley Ellterson was just 17 years old. In January of 2024, a preventable crash stole his future and shattered his family's world. Bradley's mother, Krystal Stone, never got the answers she deserved. No timely tests, no clear accountability, just silence and a broken system. Now, she's turning grief into change. Krystal is fighting for mandatory DUI and impairment testing in every fatal crash. She's fighting for transparency in reporting, for real communication between agencies. Krystal is fighting for families like hers to never be left in the dark again. This isn't about politics, it's about people. It's about justice. It's about keeping Bradley's memory alive, along with the memory of all of those who were lost too soon in tragic highway accidents. One son's memory, one mother's voice, and one cause that can't wait. Although Krystal can't rewrite her own story, she's working nonstop to prevent this tragic chapter from becoming a part of anyone else's.
Hello, thank you for joining us here at WFUZ-TV. I'm Blair Castro, and I'm here with Thomas Jenkins. Today we have a special guest, Miss Krystal Stone. Krystal is a mother who's fighting hard to bring changes to the Florida Highway Patrol, specifically how they handle a vehicular collision that ends in a fatality. Krystal has a very compelling story, and we appreciate her coming here today to tell us about her journey and the system she went through and where she feels there can be improvements. Krystal, would you like to take us through your story and the journey that you have been on here at this time?
Yeah, thank you for having me. In January 26th of 2024, I got a call around 11:30 p.m. at night from my son in Arizona, who told me that he had heard my younger son, Bradley, had been in a car crash. I instinctively tried to give Bradley's phone call number a call, and I ran into his room because I had assumed he was already home, and he wasn't there. And so I panicked, and I called his best friend, Bryce, who I knew they tracked each other on their phones, so I knew Bryce would know where he was. And Bryce was crying, and Bryce lived in Arizona, and he said, Bradley is dead.
Wow.
And I started yelling at him because I was in shock and didn't know what happened. And he said, here's the news article. And he sent me the news article. And I didn't even know where the location was. So he dropped a pin to where the location was. And I grabbed my little kids out of bed and had my husband drive to the scene. And that is where we were informed by Trooper Justice with Florida Highway Patrol that my son had passed away. So in a state of shock, I got out of the car and I ran over across the street to where his car was. Apparently he had passed a few hours before that. And Florida Highway Patrol did not notify me. He had an out-of-state license, so I guess they were having trouble figuring out who he was.
I hate that you found out through a news article. That I'm surprised that no one called you right away.
Right.
Yeah.
That is something that I did take up with Highway Patrol. Why that was sensitive information was released to the news first, and they defended their position that the media had a right to know. So
Did they release his name as well?
they didn't, but they released enough information that he was 17 years old. He was from Arizona, and it was enough for people in the area to know.
When you got on the scene, what was your interactions like from that point with the Florida Highway Patrol, who I assume at that point had taken over and the Escambia County Sheriff's Office had left by then?
Yeah. There really was no other interaction other than him telling me my son had passed. I asked about the other people in the car. He said there was 2 girls and he was not sure that one would make it. So I didn't know which one it was or anything like that. So I was really upset. So I ran over to the car looking for my son, and he wasn't there because they were already towing the car, getting ready to tow it by that point. But I was still instinctively looking for him in the car, like I was going to pull him out. And then I asked, can I see him? And I was told no. And I kept demanding, where is he? And he said, he's in the cab. Which that's why, one of the reasons I was looking in the front of the car, but I guess he meant ambulance. Yeah.
Did they give you a reason for why you couldn't see him?
No, because I thought you're supposed to identify, your loved ones, but I wasn't given a reason. And I also found out later that the medical examiner's office, their on-call people didn't come out to get Bradley or take pictures of the scene either. So I found that disturbing, and it's bothersome that a minor child would be dead and possibly another one, and nobody came out to the scene to take pictures for the medical examiner's office or to retrieve his body. And when I asked, can I see my son, from them, I was also told no. They held him for 6 days until he was released to the funeral home, at which point I was allowed to hold his hand. But that was the most torturous part, because the state can take your child, do any tests they want. They did toxicology, they did a full autopsy, and my son had no rights, no religious freedom, no Fourth Amendment rights for search and seizure, but the person who drove the car that he was in had those rights.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the police report said, and initially what kind of information you were given that you first kind of took as the knowledge you had about this scene, and how it was different from reality?
Well, first of all, there was news articles that came out that said that my son was driving, which was not correct. And then there was news articles saying he wasn't wearing his seatbelt. And then there was news articles that said he was wearing his seatbelt. And I didn't have any clarification until the following Monday, when I finally was able to speak with somebody at Florida Highway Patrol. But their initial investigation was wrong. The trooper on scene wrote the report incorrectly, stating that the Kia had come to a full stop. The Kia was the car that my son was in. He was the front passenger at a stop sign on County Road 196 and Highway 29. So they said that the car came to a full stop, then she made a right-hand turn, and that is where they were hit by the semi-truck. So that report was very wrong. It didn't match any of the evidence at the scene. And immediately the next day, when I went back out to the scene, it wasn't adding up even in my head. I couldn't piece together the gouge marks in the road. I couldn't figure out. I took lots of video, like, how the heck did this happen? Because I'm not just a person that's going to sit there and accept what someone tells me. I need to know how did this actually happen? And it just didn't make any sense to me how someone would stop at a stop sign and make a right-hand turn and not see a semi-truck, or how a semi-truck would not see somebody attempting to make a right-hand turn and brake. That didn't make any sense. So I was very confused until the driver of the Kia called me or messaged me on Sunday and asked me if I wanted to come over, which is where she confirmed that she had stopped at the stop sign and made a right-hand turn.
So she confirmed what was in the police report.
Right.
And that included the fact that the semi had hit her, according to her.
Right.
Now, based on that information, you went forward with pursuing civil damages against the semi-truck driver at first. Is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you talk a little about how, that situation ended up being different from reality, and how evidence brought different things to light?
Yes. So on the Monday that I spoke with Corporal Knowles at Florida Highway Patrol, I asked her, was the truck driver impaired? And she assured me that the truck driver wasn't, that she had spoken to the truck driver for 30 minutes and that, she's a very nice lady. So I took that at face value. And 3 or 4 days later, I called her back because I started thinking to myself, well, she said she talked to her, but did she actually give her a test? Because at this point, I'm still thinking that the semi-truck driver somehow swerved into the lane they were in, and how did this happen? And the truck driver must have been on her cell phone or distracted or impaired. So I really wanted to know. And Corporal Knowles told me, well, we never tested her. She refused to test. I said, well, then how do you know she was sober? And she said, well, I was talking to her, so that's how I know. And I found that extremely disturbing, and our conversation got very heated. So at that point, Corporal Knowles did hang up on me.
Who? After things started coming to light, who was actually tested for impairment in any capacity?
No one. The only person tested was my son after he was dead.
That seems grossly wrong. I don't understand why they would not test the driver of either vehicle, to be honest.
Yeah, it seems inconceivable, but I think most people don't realize that they're not required to test people even in a vehicle fatality or a severe crash for impairment. According to their report, their traffic homicide report, they had spoken to the driver at the hospital. The trooper arrived a couple hours after the crash. She didn't say the exact time she spoke to her or the time that she departed from speaking to her, but apparently she had offered her a drug and alcohol screening, and that had been turned down. She did not list whether she had asked if they could voluntarily search her car or if they could search her cell phone. To my knowledge, there was no field notes taken. And actually, Trooper Rudd's statement about what happened that night was not even added to the THI report until months later. So that was disturbing because she was the only person that interacted that I'm aware of with the driver of the car that killed my son. And now you had another young minor child who was fighting for her life.
Can you talk a little bit about the interactions, if any, or what you know of that occurred between the people that arrived on the scene first, which would be Escambia County Sheriff's Office, and later how they worked with Florida Highway Patrol, or what lacked in that interaction?
Yeah. So Florida Highway Patrol had in their report that there was no witnesses. They did not include any sheriff's deputies that had arrived first. They didn't include any EMS, fire, no witnesses on scene, no 911 callers. They did not follow up with anybody. I found that particularly disturbing. And I questioned them quite a bit about that and could not really get a clear answer. To me, it seems like you would speak with the deputies that were there first. What happened here? Thanks for handling this case until we got here, controlling the scene, reviving or helping to revive anything, just no interaction is pretty crazy.
We were talking a little bit about that earlier. Thomas is a former law enforcement officer, and he says that's kind of the case with the interactions between local or county deputies and then the Florida Highway Patrol, or Highway Patrol in general on that kind of level.
Right. Yeah. Not necessarily Florida. I can't speak to Florida's interactions, but in Louisiana, I was basically ignored on an accident call by a trooper. I was trying to introduce myself and he literally walks past me. Doesn't even look my direction as I'm speaking to him. And I had everything written down for him. I didn't give it to him after that. I just left the scene and let him handle it. I don't know if the process, I don't know if it's a state to state department, but in a municipal situation like I was in, I was hired on without being certified through the Law Enforcement Academy for up to a year without any training whatsoever, except some on-the-road training with another officer, which at the department I was at was exactly one night. And then I was basically thrown to the wolves to fend for myself. I don't know if Florida Highway Patrol allows people to be in a patrol situation as like a probationary thing before they send them, because the department takes taxpayer funding and sponsors the cadet to go to the academy. So they invest money. So I don't know if the Highway Patrol does like municipal departments in hiring untrained people, putting them in road training for 6-10 weeks and then releasing them by themselves to perhaps not have any idea what they're doing. I can't speak to whether that actually happens or not, but I know from a municipal department in small town Louisiana, that can definitely be the case where you can have officers come on with zero training, because think of low officer pay, your candidate pool is very shallow. And so your turnover rates are high. You've got a shallow candidate pool, low pay. And so that's why there's an entire space of people that are in preparedness saying, be able to do your own medical, be able to, defend yourself, because you can't really count 100% on EMS or first responders and having that training. You may be getting the new guy. Mm-hmm. You never know.
Well, sure. I mean, they are human.
Sure.
And, they frankly aren't paid enough. I'll be honest. It's how I feel. They're not paid enough for what they have to do.
Absolutely.
I mean, just the trauma to go on some of these scenes, putting your life at risk, pulling people over. And that's why I think that training is so important, and giving them the tools, staffing, giving them the tools that they need, and training is so important.
Under-training is a huge problem.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, in my son's case, they could have had a drug recognition expert come out and interview her, because anytime you're in a crash and there's a possible head trauma, I mean, who's to say, is it impairment from drugs or impairment from neurological changes? Or are we just too late to notice any of these because there was medical intervention? And that's why having a drug recognition expert come out in these severe crashes or fatal crashes is really important, because you need to be able to put together not how it happened, but why it happened. The why is the biggest factor. And that's the factor that all of the families are asking. And their number one question is always going to be, was this person impaired? Were they texting? In that order.
Me.
And they fall so much back on, I've talked to numerous people from Escambia County now that go to my Facebook site and to my website who have told me very similar stories. They're in the same battle where Florida Highway Patrol falls back on, well, we can't search someone's car because of the Fourth Amendment. We can't require a blood examination because of the Fourth Amendment. We can't, look at their cell phone without their permission because of the Fourth Amendment. We can't get the EDR data from the car because of the Fourth Amendment, but that's where investigation is so key. Like, well, you gather your probable cause by speaking to your witnesses, by examining the scene very closely, looking at hello, you have two vehicles with no skid marks. Something is not right here. Those types of things are where you gather your probable cause. So if you are not trained or just not looking for probable cause, you're not going to find it.
Right.
Well, and it is kind of confusing, to be honest, because, it's kind of listed twice, and it's in their policy manual. It's listed, in a vehicle fatality, probable cause, looking for your probable cause is very important, which is obvious. But I mean, and I've even asked them, well, do you have a standard protocol you follow? Do you have an algorithm you follow? Because, I previously worked in the hospital, but, if you're doing CPR on somebody, you have an algorithm you follow. Mm-hmm. This is your A, B, C. And it seems to me in investigations, maybe you need more of an algorithm to follow, or standard protocol, standard ways you do it every time so that you're not missing things.
I'm pretty sure that there is in most cases. And then again, then it makes you wonder, okay, well, where was that officer's training at? Because you said the narrative was inaccurate.
Yes, it was.
So maybe not necessarily trained thoroughly in proper report writing, because that was a big pet peeve of mine. I was fortunate that my mother was an English major, so that was one of my strong suits, was to be able to observe and report something. And so I actually had higher ups that would give me a piece of paper that looked like a third grader wrote it, and because of my position, couldn't. Again, there's just always a possibility that you just have that cop that can't do the job, but for some, either through lack of proper candidates or proper vetting or lack of training, you may have gotten, the short draw on an officer processing your scene.
Right. Well, and that is what happened in that case. I can't speak specifically to that trooper or how he came to that conclusion, but he was left alone on the scene. And so that is a big problem because you're supposed to call in a supervisor to those scenes.
Yeah, it should definitely be an all hands, like you said, an investigator and everybody.
And the traffic homicide investigator showed up an hour after the crash, and she left. She left at some point, and it's not put in the report. She puts what time she started, but she didn't say what time she ended. You know, and so this kind of fell on the trooper to handle this crash scene, which, by the way, there was a power line down. The semi-truck had veered off the side of the road, hit the power line. The truck flipped on its side. She was bashing out the front window to get out, and there was fuel leaking all over the place. And so, again, the scene wasn't secured. It wasn't roped off. There was, just in the camera footage I saw, people running on scene, people standing around, just things that shouldn't have been going on.
Yeah.
And, you know, there was a group of kids that showed up on the scene. And because apparently the kids were all heading to a bonfire party, you know, all the kids had kind of told their parents they're spending the night somewhere or whatever. And they were all going to go to a bonfire. So there was a group following. I don't know how far back behind they were following, but they had all kind of been together that night. And, you know, but nobody wanted to speak to those kids. It took months of me emailing, calling to get FHP to speak to those kids. You know, had they talked to them that night, maybe they would have more of an idea. Was there a chance she was impaired? We'll never know. We'll never know. Because, you know, months later, they're all saying, no, no one was. And then someone else is pointing the finger, well, yeah, that group was. And it's kind of like, well, were they or weren't they? You know, but we know my son was. So.
What was your experience like obtaining the records from everything that happened? Did you have to subpoena for them when you went to Highway Patrol? Did they give them willingly? Did you have to wait a long time?
So that was another problem. I didn't even know that they had given her a citation, and she'd already been, they gave her 2 citations. And for one of them, she had already been to court. The second citation, the running the stop sign, I only found out about that because another mother who had been through this emailed me and said, hey, heads up, she's already got a court hearing scheduled. And at that point, I contacted FHP like, hey, you guys never gave me this report. You never even told me the case was closed, you know. And I think that was about 9 or 10 months after the crash had happened that the case was closed, and I didn't even know about it. So I did go down and get those records. But also, I ended up speaking to Florida Highway Patrol after the crash because I thoroughly reviewed the records. And then I had requested from Tallahassee the audio of the statements that the kids had made. And what was in the report did not match the actual statements. There were things added to that report that were not said, that kind of backed Florida Highway Patrol's position that they did not have to give her a field sobriety, or they didn't have to give her blood alcohol testing. I asked them to correct it. They said they would, and they never did.
I know you had mentioned, so when all this was going on, there's no like real tangible proof that she had been impaired with alcohol at this point.
No.
Until later you found out about a can of Twisted Tea, I think, in the car, and you had spoke to someone. So at what point did it become clear, like, oh, she may have been drinking and no one's tested her for this?
So I had heard from kids at school, you know, she drives impaired. So red flags were going off. This was after I found out that she had hit the truck, because we had hired our own investigator to check everything out. So we knew at that point she hit the truck, and that the truck had never hit her. She drove right through the front cabin, the fuel tank. I would have never suspected that she ever drove impaired. These were other people that had told me. When I had a chance to listen to the audio statements from these kids, they were all saying the same thing. You know, She has a history of driving under the influence. So those are huge red flags to me. Then I had spoken in between that time. So in October, I spoke to a deputy. And I honestly was just wanting to speak with him about my son. I wanted to know if my son had had any last words. And I knew he was at the scene. And when I was talking to him toward the end of our conversation, he was very nice to me. We were talking about where the kids were going and that there was twisted tea wrappers outside of the car and another alcoholic beverage. I can't remember which one. And this is stuff that I'm seeing on the ground post-crash, because there was a lot of debris left there. There was homework, all kinds of stuff. And he mentioned that he had seen twisted tea in the car. He smelled alcohol in the car that night. That was one of the first things. But he said, I didn't see alcohol, but I didn't realize twisted tea was alcohol. I thought twisted tea was tea.
Wow.
So I don't know. I mean, I can't say she was. I have no proof.
Right.
But this is where communication between FHP, who's in charge of the investigation, was really important. Even if they had talked to firefighters or EMS, it could have said, we smelled something, we saw something, anything,
It seems like having a mandate or requirement to test for alcohol impairment in situations where there's a fatality would make life easier on everyone, and it would cause way less problems, like the deputies, the Florida Highway Patrol, the families. I understand that the Fourth Amendment is important, but for a simple test like this, when something so serious has happened, it would remove a lot of the gray areas and the wondering left for people.
Yeah. Because it clears up, was this truly an accident or was there more to it? And that does a lot for families when they're trying to grieve and put the puzzle pieces together and have closure. When you are going up against law enforcement and it feels like as the family member, you almost become the enemy to them. When you're just trying to ask these important questions and you're holding them to it and you're basically being gaslit, it puts you in a fight or flight mode instead of being able to come to the point of acceptance and trusting that law enforcement is going to do everything they can to prosecute or come up with charges or whatever they need to do. But when you see these obvious failures one after another, you have no confidence in the system then.
How long did it take before the actual investigator showed up between when the accident occurred? I know you said there was a pretty big gap there.
Yeah. I can't remember the exact time, but it was close to an hour. So I've heard about these cases, a lot of them actually, where FHP is not showing up for a very long time to these crash scenes. And I know that they are spread thin, which is, again, staffing. Like we're the state of Florida. We should have enough staff. We should have enough troopers out there to cover this area. It shouldn't be taking them an hour to arrive to scenes, frankly.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the data you had shared with me previously. You were talking about how within, a certain year, there was roughly 57 vehicular or incidents that involved a fatality, but only a small number of that came back as DUIs or drug impairment. Can you talk a little bit about those numbers and where you think that comes from and why it's significantly lower?
Yeah. So I was looking at the data online, which is public record, and I was looking at the number of, so the state of Florida lists it by vehicle fatalities. So you can see the exact number. So there was, say in 2024, 57, there was 61 deaths. So a couple of people died, and there was probably 2 people that died in some of those crashes. Okay. But 57 drivers were in a vehicle fatality. Okay. There's 57 crashes, I mean. And the number was like 7 were tested for impairment, or 7 came back impaired, either with drugs, they list it by drugs, alcohol, or both. And there was 7. So I started looking back at all the years. They were like really low since 2017 for this area, because you can do it by county and you can compare it to state average, national average, which the state average is, 32 to 34%. And that's the same with the national average for impairment. So you're talking 1/3 of people we know are impaired when they cause a vehicle fatality. If that's not probable cause, I don't know what is, but I don't make the laws. So I messaged the captain here and said, hey, what's the deal with this? And he said, there's no possible way. He went back and looked and then came back and said, no, there's actually more. And then they emailed me again. No, there's actually more. There's actually 17. So I've requested those records, which instead of Tallahassee giving me those records now, because I'm looking at them like, okay, well, how many of these were actually arrested and prosecuted then, or charged with VHOM? And now they've referred me to our local troop here to obtain all those records, which I don't feel confident that I'm going to get, to be honest with you.
You still haven't received them?
No, I'm going to submit my payment. It's like $300 something.
Wow.
But I have a friend going through something similar right now who requested records. And instead of Tallahassee sending them, which I feel more comfortable with, it was sent over to Troop A, her traffic homicide investigator, who then said these records don't exist. Well, some of them did exist. And I've heard about this, with another friend of mine, another case where she paid a lot of money for records and they did not provide them. And so I plan on going back to Tallahassee and saying, well, I want them to come from you. I'd rather you mail them or whatever, just so I can take a better look. But they said now that there was 17 DUI related fatalities out of 57 here last year, but they have not corrected the other years. So why are they so low the other years? I don't know.
Did they update like their website or information at that point when they came back and said, oh, there's actually 17?
Yeah, they did. But they only updated last year. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is they included a case on there that I know of. And I know this because it happened right next to my son. I've been following this case. And the person did get charged with a DUI, but he wasn't charged with vehicular homicide. And in fact, they said, the prosecutor said, well, he didn't have anything to do with the crash. Crash was unavoidable, which is very strange to me. So I'm not exactly sure why that is included in their statistics, but that's another reason I want to look at the cases, like examine them and because there's quite a number of them that they just put case closed, the person is deceased. So I'm curious what that is all about. But
so Blair, you were talking about moving legislation that would pertain to the particulars in this case and other vehicular homicide cases. What would be your steps in getting that done?
So I would think that based on your petition and the things you and the other parents and grieving families are asking for, that it would be common sense to already have this in place. The fact that it's not is really shocking to me, but it would have to go as a bill in the State House and the Senate, up both chambers and be voted on and approved, which I think that people would want to see that in place. I am curious as to anyone that would fight against it, and maybe the entities themselves, because it requires more work on their behalf and maybe makes a few extra loopholes for them. But at the same time, it really does protect everybody from uncertainties, from backlash, from false information, from, it just makes the process easier. A really difficult process that people are already struggling to go through. It could just make it a little less traumatizing, I think, to have this protocol in place where there would be mandatory impairment testing in some way that doesn't violate constitutional amendments. There's been a fatality. There is probable cause. Let's test this person so people can get answers that they deserve.
Right. And I did find this out recently, Blair, actually, that our Florida Highway Patrol does not use breathalyzers. Apparently they don't hold up in court. But there are other states that use different types of breathalyzers that do hold up in court, and using a breathalyzer does not violate your Fourth Amendment rights. So if we could get breathalyzers here, which is what, when I asked FHP, when I had a conversation with them, what could help you do your job better? Like, what could I advocate for that would make things easier for y'all? They said breathalyzers. Like, we would like to have them because it doesn't impede the Fourth Amendment. And that does give you your probable cause. If somebody blows and it's over the legal limit, then you can legally go ahead. There is your cause right there. You can go ahead and do a blood draw. But, like I told Florida Highway Patrol, what is the harm in going to a judge and getting a warrant anyway, or attempting to get warrants for things with the evidence that you do come up across? And that's why talking to other law enforcement and people on the scene is very important, because that's where you can get those details. You take it to a judge. The worst thing a judge is going to say is, no, you can't have your warrant. Mm-hmm. At least you can look in the family's face and say, I did everything I could.
That's exactly what I was thinking. And I actually practiced criminal defense briefly, and I noticed the same thing. The breathalyzers do get thrown out often, but to have that breathalyzer there, sometimes they're not calibrated, they're an old model, something's going on with it, but that is the first step in testing. And then from then you can proceed to other tests that will stand up in court. So to me, it just makes sense. And the worst thing that can happen, like you said, is that they file a motion to suppress the breathalyzer and it gets suppressed. Well, you still have other things, and that still helps you on the scene and day of, and you can deal with the other stuff down the road when court actually comes. Right. So the fact that it doesn't stand up in court always, to me, is not a good argument for not having them, because there's still something critical for that moment in time that is a good foundation for what happens next in your case.
Yes, I agree. And another thing is, I know that our area here has been down a lot of troopers. To my knowledge, they haven't been able to hire. They were down, I think they told me 13 troopers when Bradley passed away.
Wow.
And this is already an area it's a big area. To be down so many troopers is a lot. They're a small group. So that puts a lot of pressure on them to be different places at different times, And so while I do hold them accountable and want to see a better job, I also understand some of the limitations that are in place for them, as well as, if they have to drag somebody to the hospital. Say you have a person that doesn't go to the hospital or is refusing. If you have to drag them to the hospital to draw blood, that process of drawing the blood, then requesting for that blood to be sent to FDLE, then to actually arrest the person is 4 or 5 hours. So if you have limited troopers out there and now you're utilizing this one to go process a DUI, you see how taxing that is. Before, our EMS used to draw blood for them. But we've had all kinds of issues with EMS locally in our area too. So, there's a lot of things that aren't helpful for them. And that, again, that's where training, tools, these things come into place for them to help them do a better job. And because we know people that, do, that drive recklessly or that get DUIs, they reoffend.
Yes.
And that's why it's so important to have a harsh fine. That was the other thing when I asked FHP. They said harsher fines. If we had harsher fines, that would stop some of this stuff. And I agree. Our fines are very low.
We were just talking about that earlier, why do people, they got 3 DUIs, 4 DUIs. Like, how is that happening? Why do people keep repeating it?
When I was on patrol, I gave a former judge his 3rd DUI. He was in his late 70s, and yeah, that just shocked me. I was 21 years old at the time, and I just don't understand why there's not harsher punishment. I mean, I do. Another example, I was driving home for Thanksgiving from Hattiesburg, Mississippi to Picayune, Mississippi, and 11 a.m. on Thanksgiving, this woman got drunk. She had already been arrested for DUI earlier that week.
Uh-huh.
Got in her car at 11 in the morning, drives the wrong way up the interstate, and kills 2 different cars at
Wow.
Thanksgiving morning.
That's awful.
And, it's DUI is a crime of the affluent, and that's why there's been no legislation to make harsher punishment for it.
You think so?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I've been straight told that by a state trooper that was a trainer.
Wow. Well, I just saw a case that went through the court system here where a girl was killed and the guy was drinking and driving, but he was not charged with her death, just the drinking, the DUI part. And he was supposed to get 90 days in jail. And the judge said, because of your time served in the military, he was a retired sergeant. We will not give you the 90 days in jail.
Wow.
Gosh.
That's very unfair. And we talk about this all the time because, he works in the bar scene a lot, and me being kind of new to it, but witnessing the stuff that goes on, people I feel like just don't take it seriously. It's a culture thing in this area in particular, because
we see people we know stumble out the door and highly likely drive away that way, insisting that they're fine to other people.
It's almost laughed at, like, oh, home, just going home and I'm drunk. Like, I'm so tired of it. It's too many people's lives have been lost, especially like young people cut short when they had this whole future ahead over a very quick decision that could have been prevented. And I know this is not a new thing that people are talking about, but when you just see it every day, and you said like crime of the affluent, that is so true, because me having worked in politics, like congressional people and senator people, this is something they almost all have a DUI somewhere in there. It's a common, like, if they've gotten in trouble for something, that's usually what it is. Even attorneys.
I've seen a DUI lawyer driving around with an open container after having had a couple of drinks at the bar and just driving around. Like, it's like that. And it's so minimized. It's sickening.
Yeah. Well, in Arizona, my dad, this was in the 80s and 90s. It took 3 DUIs and him losing his license for 10 years for him to never do it again. And my dad never had a ticket after that, but he lost his license for a long time. And that's what it took. And unfortunately, it does take harsh penalties sometimes, but you're alive.
Yeah. If you're not going to learn from a slap on the wrist, then, it's putting everybody at risk.
Yeah, it is. And until it affects them, they don't know. I mean, there's so many people in our area that have no idea that this kind of stuff goes on. I mean, I guess ignorance is bliss, right? Until it happens to you. And then you feel very alone.
Yes.
But I have seen, to FHP's credit, I have seen 2 cases recently where it feels like they jumped right on it. I mean, they arrest the person right away. They file charges right away. And that's key. Like, that initial investigation, the very first initial investigation after the crash is so crucial. It's the most important part. If you do not do that right, then you have so many holes in your case and it just is not going to stand up.
Sure. Yeah, if you don't have proper staging of the scene and it's tainted by people walking through it or whatever, it can taint the whole thing.
Well, and I've even seen people say, criticize my son, saying, well, he was high, and if he got into the car with somebody impaired, that's his fault. Or if he wasn't wearing a seatbelt, that's his fault. And it's like, well,
it's awful.
He did pay the ultimate price for his choices, and that's death.
Not a kind thing.
But that doesn't mean that a person who is driving poorly shouldn't have a proper investigation or charges.
Absolutely.
And that person's life is not ruined. They still have a life.
Mm-hmm.
Even a little jail time for some people isn't going to ruin your life.
Right. Exactly.
Because you still have a life, and I've heard people say that, like, oh, well, she's just a teenager and you should just forgive or whatever. It's like, well, until it happens to you. Because what if she, instead of driving into the semi-truck, what if she drove into your mom van at night and killed your child?
Exactly.
Or how about the semi-truck driver who lost her license because of this? She did nothing wrong, but was driving down the road and somebody plowed into the side of her rig. And because that report was written, she is no longer insurable. She did nothing wrong. She's a single mom of 5 kids. How about her? She didn't deserve that. What if she didn't make it that night?
Mm-hmm. And I had told you this before, but I just wanted to reiterate that as horrific and traumatizing as all of this is for someone to go through, I literally have no idea how you do it or how anyone does it, because it, to me, is a living nightmare. Like, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the 2 other cases where they actually arrested someone and where charges happened quickly. That is a direct result of you and your advocacy and what you're doing. So you should be proud of that, and you should know that your voice isn't going unheard, that changes are happening. And I hate that it's, come this late, but I do think going forward that everything you're doing, it's already started, and that hopefully less families will be affected in such a terrible way, and that the process will be a little easier for them. One of those cases was my son's friend and coworker recently. So yeah,
Luca.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard for me to see photos of your son. I'm sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, he was a sweet, sweet boy. He was a sweet child. He had good grades. He was very outgoing, very friendly, very life of the party. Just, there's a big void in my house now. He was the funny one. And the rest of us are a little more serious. But he was definitely the funny one. And my dad, too. My dad died right after. So we've had a big void in our house since then. But I just try to hold on to that. I know I'll see him again. And all I can do is try to help families now that are going through it, and hopefully try to change things for the better locally here, to help this process be better for even law enforcement so that they can do the job correctly too.
Well, I think you're doing that. I'm really proud of you.
Oh, you're so sweet.
So
It's hard to talk about. So
Yeah, I know. I break down a lot.
So I tried really hard to keep it together. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. No, it was, what's the most traumatizing part is, I relive it, like just arriving to that scene. It's like I'll start to fall asleep, and just as I'm right at that edge of sleep, I wake up jolted and my heart rate just speed, like it must be PTSD or something.
Yeah.
Remembering that and other really, really triggering events from that. And all I wanted in the beginning was to find out the truth, which I found out.
Krystal, can you tell us a little bit about how people can get involved and what they can do to make a difference and support this cause, and what you would like to see ultimately occur in terms of changes with Florida Highway Patrol or any other legislative body?
Yes. So you can find out more information on justiceforbradley.com. There is a link to a change.org petition. We're petitioning the governor and the legislature here to modify the law so that automatic blood draws can occur in severe crashes and vehicle fatalities, as well as looking at somebody's text records and cell phone records to see if they were texting and driving.
Where can people follow you to read about your journey and how any changes or updates that are occurring in this respect?
Yeah. So for continuing this story, as well as other local stories that are happening in the same kind of capacity, is on Facebook. It's Justice for Bradley with the @ symbol for his BRA, the @ symbol Bradley. It's the Facebook group for Pensacola.
Well, thank you so much for coming here and sharing. I really appreciate it, and you respect all you're doing to make something good come out of a really tragic situation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. I appreciate you guys so much.
All right, my name is Bradley Ellterson. This right here, my Lightning McQueen Crocs. They just came in the mail like this. Don't know what this is about, but here I go. Let's see if we got them in here. Oh, this is the happiest moment of my life. What you know about that? What you know about this right here? Who got these? Who got these? You see this? They light up. What you know about that, huh? Huh?